I'm delighted to welcome to the stage our three additional panelists, and Scott is going to join them as well. You're good, bud. We'll also do kind of a little bit of Q&A at the end, and then again, please join us in the reception afterwards. And I'm just delighted to mention these three members of Badger 6, this incredible organization that was founded by Shannon and others in memory of her husband, and basically with the sole purpose of helping Afghan allies get out of Afghanistan and help them once they get here. Shannon Spann DeBruyn is an attorney and former CIA intelligence officer. Shannon served over a decade in counterterrorism operations. She's the widow of Mike Spann, the first American killed in action in Afghanistan, and she continues to honor his legacy through advocacy and security consulting. David Tyson is a retired CIA operations officer and linguist who was part of Team Alpha, the first U.S. team behind enemy lines in Afghanistan after 9/11. He received the CIA's Distinguished Intelligence Cross for valor and is fluent in multiple Central Asian languages. And our moderator this evening will be Toby Harnden. Toby is an award-winning author and former foreign correspondent who's reported from more than 30 countries, specializing in terrorism and war. His book that we have here tonight, First Casualty, tells the untold story of Team Alpha's mission after 9/11, when the United States was, starting operations to topple Al-Qaeda and Taliban in Afghanistan. Will you please welcome me and join me, Shannon Spann DeBruyn, David Tyson, Toby Harnden, and Scott Mann.
Thank you so much, everybody. It's a great honour to be here on Veterans Day.
It's not all right.
How's that? Better. It's a great honour to be here in Houston on Veterans Day, amongst so many great Americans, so many people who've served our country in so many different ways. And to be sitting alongside David, Shannon and Scott. Maybe start with Shannon. The picture behind us is Team Alpha, an eclectic bunch of Americans who people joke they look like a bunch of dads going on a fishing trip. But these were the first Americans behind enemy lines after 9/11, that kind of America's pickup team. No cool sleeve tattoos, no body armor, no helmets, no specialized weaponry. There's a Kalashnikov rifles, same ammunition as the Afghans, about to fly into the unknown. One of them was your husband, Mike Spann, a former Marine, who sadly was not here yesterday to celebrate the Corps' 250th birthday. Scott painted a very evocative picture of August 2021. Tell us, maybe starting at that point, what happened on those days in August 2021, how that connected with Mike and Team Alpha and 9/11, and maybe bring us to today as well.
Yeah, this is, I love how you set this up, Scott, because it literally is a full circle story of we've got your back. I mean, this team here had all of our backs after we were attacked on 9/11. And when we saw what was happening in August of 2021, we had that same sense. We can't, the Afghan partners that this team worked with, we can't just forget about them and leave them behind. So people sometimes in the course of the work that we're doing to honor the faithful and valuable service of our Afghan partners, asked me, what is my connection to Afghanistan? It's not as direct as these two. I wasn't on the ground. I didn't work with the Afghan allies, but in the upper right, that's my late husband, Mike. We joined CIA at the same time, trained together in training. After we finished training, Mike went on to a career in special activities to become a paramilitary case officer, and I went to CTC, the CIA's counterterrorist center, and the idea was Mike was going to do a few short-term missions until we got posted as a family overseas for a long-term posting. He was on one of those missions until September 9th of 2001 and returned home on Sunday, and then September 11th happened on Tuesday. So at that time, our son Jake had just been born in June, so Jake winds up playing an important role in the story of Badger 6. He was born in June, Mike left in July, and then he came home in September and then left again a few weeks later. So Jake spent a total of 6 weeks with his dad. And so it's in August of 21. We're watching this disaster on the television. David and I are starting to get calls, the team are starting to get calls, things like Scott was explaining of our partners left behind. And so we're working phones, we're doing the things that you just illustrated. We're staying up all night, watching little pinpoints on the map, trying to get people to the places that we knew they needed to go. And at some point, it was not working. And some of it was working, and we had a family miss the bus and miss the point, and I was crying in the kitchen. And Jake, who's now 24, was sitting across the table from me. He was home from college, and he looked at me and he said, "Mom, hasn't Afghanistan already cost you enough?" And all I could do was look at him. We have your back. We can't just say that it's too much. What's too much is leaving our friends behind. So David and I got reconnected around that time and started working together to honor the promise and to continue that story of we have your back.
And Badger 6 was the call sign of Mike's during this period.
Yeah, the team, 8 guys, but they split up, and David can tell more about this. They split up on many different missions in those early days, and first in Afghanistan, and well, the picture's not there anymore, but
there it is.
Mike, and this is Justin down here, and Mark next to him in the black hat. The 3 of them, it was their call sign, wasn't it, when they went to Bamyan Province on a separate mission from the team. So we named our organization Badger 6 to honor Team Alpha and Mike and the Afghans that worked with them.
And I believe that Mike called an LZ, a landing strip for helicopters, LZ Jake, and had an argument with somebody at headquarters who wanted it to be called something else.
Yeah.
David and then Scott, tell the audience about the Afghans, what they were like to fight alongside. David, you're on horseback there, which was a pretty uncomfortable experience, I know. Who are these people? Who are these warriors that we now have this debt to help?
We were inserted into an area in northern Afghanistan that was controlled by a warlord who was an ethnic Uzbek. And as you know, Afghanistan has different ethnic groups inside it. And you know, over periods of time, you can say that there was civil war in Afghanistan based on ethnicity and so forth. And the guys, the warlord we were working with was an ethnic Uzbek. And these men were known for various things. They had, you know, stereotypes and reputations. One of the things that these fighters were cavalrymen. They fought on horseback. They not only rode horses, for transport, but they fought. They conducted cavalry charges against the enemy fortifications, and did so very impressively. They were well known for that, and when we inserted, they sort of expected us to join them. And that was a shock to us in a number of ways. Not only were we not prepared, I, for example, had never ridden a horse before. So these things were part of the process which we, engaged in to become, to work closely with these men. I would stress that these men at this time, as all of our Afghan allies, understood that they were under great risk for what they were doing. They knew, and at this time, 98% of the country was controlled by Taliban and Al-Qaeda forces. So these small pockets of resistance were populated by people and men who were fighting against the tide and against the odds. And we showed up with 8 guys. That's it. They expected more. They expected more firepower and everything else. But they still cast their lots with us and joined us, understanding that every day might be their end. So their willingness to fight with us and to take up our cause and to follow our instructions on how to fight a war and how to move and so forth was done at great risk to themselves, and they did so without hesitation. We were the only game in town, the only chance they had, and they joined wholeheartedly. And they saved our lives on many occasions. And we did do these movements with them, under great stress and pain and suffering and fear. We rode the horses with them, and we watched them with the help of our Green Beret teams that came after us, turn the tide in Afghanistan. And a truly impressive feat watching the use of 21st century technology and sort of 13th century, customs and practices with horses. And these men, for the most part, had never gone to school. They had been fighting their entire lives. From the Soviet period, fighting against the Soviets, fighting civil wars, riding horses, and they had no conception of who we were at all. And it was extremely interesting, to say the least, to watch the culture clash and them grow accustomed to us and we grow accustomed to them. And it was almost a seamless operation in many ways. And so, once again, we relied on them. They were the first Afghans to shed blood on our behalf at our instruction, the first ones that have their own blood shed, and a truly remarkable experience.
And Scott, Afghanistan, I think, is a country that kind of etched itself on one's soul in the end, and the people as well. What's been your experience with the Afghans? Who are these people?
I guess I had from David's point of view, I was fortunate in the sense that I was there at multiple times after that, and I saw the evolution of a country that was getting its feet underneath it and finding its way. And it was certainly no exception with the military. The Afghan National Army, I remember when it first stood up, it started to get actual, battalions, or what they called Kandaks, out in the field in 2004, 2005. And I'd come from a group in Special Forces that had worked primarily in Central and South America. So we had done a lot of work with the Colombians and the Peruvians in the 90s. And but watching the Afghans evolve as a professional fighting force, and I think what a lot of people don't understand is, for example, by 2008, 2009, Afghan special operators are a whole different level of operator. You're talking about commandos, Afghan special forces, Zero teams, Kaskateas, like JSOC, the equivalent, and really competent, good units with their own aviation wing. By 2014, they're conducting 95% of the fighting in the country. So this crap that the Afghans didn't fight, a lot of these dudes sitting in the back fought to the last round. And you know, and are still working resistance now. So their competency, in my opinion, I've worked with a lot of armies. I mean a lot in my career. I've never seen a group with the level of competency and capability like the Afghan Special Operations community. And the last thing I will say, if you want to know what their caliber is, you know, I will tell you, like Nizam, you know, in the beginning, he was selected to go to our U.S. Special Forces course. He graduated the Q course at Fort Bragg. He is a certified 18 Bravo Weapons Sergeant Green Beret, right? And, you know, many of the gentlemen sitting back here, very, very similar capabilities, but what really stood out to me about Nizam, and I think it's endemic of the Afghan community as brothers, but when Hurricane Milton was zoning in on Tampa, where we live, my wife Monty and I live, we actually stood Task Force Pineapple back up in our signal chat room, because we were getting ready. We had just helped with the hurricane in western North Carolina. So this community of veterans continues to come together around natural disasters, right? So Milton is coming towards Tampa. Well, Nizam now lives in Texas, right outside Houston. He's got his own tractor trailer. All of a sudden, in the chat room, this new member appears, and he says, "Hey, this is Nizam. I've got an empty truck. I'm outside Tallahassee. Where do you need me?" And that's who these guys are.
There are many competing demands for our attention, for our money, and so sometimes I get asked the question, why should we care? Why should we care about Afghans? And I know that the answer to that, I think, is on multiple levels. And so I'd like to hear the answer to that from all three of you. And also, I think the question that's connected is, what are these Afghans doing for America now? These Afghans that we've helped to who are here. Maybe Shannon first.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many answers to that question. One of the immediate ones that comes to mind is, why should we care? I mean, I think Scott has beautifully portrayed, and David spoke to the reality that they're our brothers, our partners. They saved our lives. They fought alongside us. They helped us. So we went into Afghanistan with the goal of making Afghanistan inhospitable for further attack planning against the homeland. The entire 20 years we were there, that goal was accomplished. And it wasn't accomplished by us. Like Scott said, it was accomplished by these partners. So why do we care? Partly because we've lived in absolute safety from Al-Qaeda in the entire time that that mission was accomplished. And that's the first thing that comes to my mind in terms of, the second thing that comes to my mind coming from an intelligence background, I think this point was already raised as well. The way the intelligence game is played and won is trust. And if we break that promise of I have your back, why can we expect in the foreign field any asset to help us to know the plans and intentions of foreign governments, foreign terror organizations, any of our enemies? If we can't be the people that honor the promise, I pity the case officer in the field now that is trying to recruit someone to help us.
I guess I'll address it on two levels. I'll start with why we should care about Afghanistan in general, because I mean, I hear that question a lot. You know, can't we just move on? It's 20 years. Here's my take on that, is that I think the first thing is you have to remember that the enemy that we face today, and there's several, right? But the one that is the Islamist terror groups like Al-Qaeda, ISIS-K, they have a vote in what happens in our lives. Like they actually get to vote in the outcome. And the way that they're voting is a global caliphate. A global caliphate that has a multi-generational narrative that they will not stop at anything until they establish that global caliphate. And pre-9/11 and post-9/11, their strategic sanctuary was Afghanistan. And it is, again, there are more than 20 global terror groups reestablished in Afghanistan, now most of them using former Afghan National Army and NATO bases. They are actively planning and preparing for another attack. We know that because many of the Afghan special operators and intelligence operatives that were recruited during the 20-year war were abandoned and are now on the phone with all of the global war on terror veterans. And we're talking to them daily about what's going on. So the big reason I think we should care is because we are, in my assessment, in another pre-9/11 threat scenario, and we are asleep at the switch. And that's number one. To Shannon's point, the other thing is we have to recognize that does anybody really think that any threat that we deal with in the world today we're going to deal with unilaterally? There's not a single threat that we're going to take on by ourselves. Whether that's a conventional threat like Russia or China, or whether it's Al-Qaeda or ISIS, we're going to rely on partners. And I'll just give you a scenario of a young Green Beret who was working in Ukraine, and he was working alongside a Ukrainian officer, and it got pretty sporty, things were getting rough, and the Green Beret came to this moment where he had to say something to the Ukrainian he's advising, and he said, "Sir, I just need you to trust me." You mean like the Afghans trusted you? Now this is where we're putting our young special operators today. My son is an infantryman now. So he's the one that's going to inherit this, right? That's the biggest thing. And then the final thing I'll just say on why should we care about the Afghans. I mean, if you look at the caliber of special operators and service members that have come over here and what they are sacrificing, I mean, these were people at the top of their game over there. They don't have a VA. They have no one to help them with their trauma. They suffer their nightmares in the dark, and there's nobody to turn to or talk to, right? But they drive the trucks, and they drive the Ubers, and they work in the factories like every immigrant that has come to this country so that their kids can have a better life. That's why. And I've fought alongside these men, and I'm telling you, and women, and I've worked along a lot of indigenous partners. I've never seen a group of humans like this, and I suspect I never will. And I hope that at some point we start recognizing the quality of people that they are.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in Badger 6, our experience has been that these are people who absolutely do not want a hand out. They may need a hand up, although it's sometimes hard to persuade them to actually take it. But they are incredibly hardworking. They love America, even though most of them have not become Americans yet. And they're on a journey to become part of the tapestry of this nation. Just as, you know, we see Vietnamese around the country, we see Iranians, and I think they contribute greatly to the richness of America. This is Veterans Day. Yesterday was the Marine Corps birthday, and all of us have known people who have made the ultimate sacrifice in Afghanistan. We're at Badger 6. Mike Spann is always in our mind. David, perhaps you could talk a little bit about Mike, who he was, what happened to him on November 25th, 2001, and how his spirit, just as the spirit of others who've been lost, is part of this mission that continues to help these Afghan allies.
Right. Obviously, Shannon can speak much more to who Mike was as a person, but as a person who worked with him, I can say Mike was an unambiguous man in terms of his feelings about the world, about work. Everything was clear to him, who the enemy was, and his goal was to be at the pointy end of that spear. He made that clear every day during our deployment. And he was in the right place at the right time for him as a person. That's what he wanted. And so that was inspiring to me, even back then, to be beside a person like that, a very tough man, a very hard-working man, and somebody who wanted to protect people. He wanted to protect his country. He wanted to protect his family, and he knew clearly what was going on in his life. He was killed on 25 November 2001 in an uprising of Al-Qaeda prisoners. These prisoners were captured during the course of the fighting in 2001, and these men were brought back to an area, and we were instructed by our headquarters that we would go in and figure out who these men were by taking their documents, taking pictures, and doing a cursory identity check with them and trying to get them to speak a little bit, and that was going very, very successfully. These men were from countries all over the world, to include the United States. We had 2 American citizens amongst them, 2 Al-Qaeda members who were Americans. One was John Walker Lynn, who you may have heard of, a kid from California. And this process was going well until it didn't, until the uprising began. And in sort of true agency fashion, there were only 2 of us there, 2 Americans, myself and Mike. We had our Afghan security contingent. Most of them were killed during this process after the uprising started, and Mike was killed very quickly as well. And he was, interestingly enough, at a location where he was providing help, overseeing medical support to these Al-Qaeda men who had grievous wounds from battle and so forth. And Mike was not only collecting intelligence, but he was also overseeing a medical process for these wounded men. Because Mike, while he was a true professional and, you know, one of those tough guys on the front lines, he was also a great American, a great human being, and he was trying to care for these men as well. So Mike was killed very quickly during the process, and that was the start of a 5-day siege that we took part in. And as I mentioned, we lost a lot of Afghan partners as well during that fight. Some of whom, their widows and children are now in the United States, thankfully. We brought them over. And some of whom are still in other countries waiting to come here.
Thanks, David. And I mean, David's very modest about this, but his combat experience on that day was something very, very few Americans have lived to tell the tale. He expended 5 rounds from his Browning high-power, 5 magazines from his Browning high-power pistol, which is 75 rounds. He used all the rounds left in Mike's Kalashnikov, and also picked up a Kalashnikov off the battlefield as well in those 18 or so minutes to get out. He had grenades bouncing off him that didn't explode, and it was this incredible situation of kill or be killed, and David survived, was able to call in reinforcements, and it's an incredible act of heroism and resilience. Shannon, just on Mike, you spoke to Mike on the satellite phone occasionally, and he had quite a bond with the Afghans during this period.
Yeah, that was a surprising thing for me during that time, was that I would get to hear from him every so often on the satellite phone. And I remember him telling me a few stories about some of the guys that he worked particularly close with. One man is in Doha right now with his family, still awaiting permission from the US government for us to bring him here to this country. He was, I think Tahir went on that bombing, the Badger 6 mission with them, didn't he? Yeah. He was their interpreter for that mission, the call sign Badger 6. And I remember Mike telling me, I asked Tahir, if I write to my headquarters and ask anything that you need, what would it be? And he asked, oh, could I have the great books on tape? Because I'm really trying to perfect my English. And so, in the next airdrop, books on tape and a tape recorder, a bunch of batteries come. And that was, you know, just sort of one example of, I didn't get to hear a lot of the stories, but, you know, you saw the picture of the guys in front of the helicopter, and Mike had a tough exterior and he looked like an all-business guy, but he really had a tender disposition when it came to building relationship. He had a really good sense of humor, and he was really careful about not just having surface relationships, and he really did care about these guys. And I remember a few years after that, every so often Tahir would call me on the phone in Virginia, and he would say, I just want to know how are the children of Mike Spann.
Yeah, thank you. And Scott, you must have lost many friends in Afghanistan, American friends as well as Afghans. And how does their memory connect with what the work you're doing today?
Well, I think for me, it's storytelling. You know, I mean, whether they were Afghan friends or U.S. friends, yeah, and I did. I lost a lot of buddies in that long war, and you know, there isn't a day goes by that I don't think about them and wonder why they're not here and I am. You know, but I feel like, at least for me, you know, the mandate I've been given is to try to tell their story. Yeah. There was a guy named Tim O'Brien who wrote a book called The Things They Carried about Vietnam, and at the end of the book, he says that stories are for those late hours in the night when you can't remember how you got from where you were to where you are, for when memory is erased and there's nothing left to remember but the story. And I just feel like, you know, for me, it's being able to tell the stories of those guys and just how awesome they were and how funny they were and how committed they were to their profession. It's just everything, man. Traveling the country and telling these stories and seeing the looks on people's faces who've never been around it, and all of a sudden they feel like they know them. So I think for me, it's just trying to keep their stories alive. And I think we have to be very careful as a country. Not only have we, I think, abandoned our allies in a way that this multi-generational systemic abandonment started with Montagnards, and it's got to stop. Like, we've got to stop doing this like it's a bad date or something. You cannot do that. But I also think, as a nation, and hopefully this forum and others around the country can do this. This is not a Republican or Democrat issue. You cannot turn the page on a 20-year war and a generation of veterans like it was just something that never happened. And I feel like that's what we did as a country with Afghanistan in particular. We turned the page like it never happened. And there's a cost to that. And that social contract that I talked about that is in place, it is very fragile, and it is not an entitlement. Most countries in the world don't have it. They don't have the relationship with their veterans like we do. They don't have an all-volunteer force like we do. And it is not an entitlement. It is managed by the citizenry. They're the stewards. And I think we've got to reclaim this. We've got to get out of this notion of abandonment. In fact, for this issue right here, I mean, I look at how hard these guys are working to resist in Afghanistan. You know, it's not over. It's like T.E. Lawrence said, that nothing is written. It's not done. These guys aren't done. And I suspect we're going to find ourselves back in that country, because we are inextricably linked to Afghanistan, and we will be. There's no getting around that. And it would be in our best interest, I think, to start recognizing that when it's kind of like when we were kids and you go in the shop with your mom, and there was that sign, you break it, you buy it. You know, that's true with our partner force too. If we go in there and break things and knock things around, then we bought it. And we need to stay with it the same way that you would stay through with a friend through rough times. And we haven't been doing that. And it's a bad model. It's a bad look for us as a nation. It's a bad look for our kids. And so for me, it's about telling the story. And if it's uncomfortable, so be it. Because that's my brothers that fell. They deserve better. And they did die for something. It wasn't in vain, and it wasn't just so that girls could go to school in Afghanistan. I think it was much more than that. It's just not there yet. It hasn't happened yet. It's coming. But as a citizen, we've got to get back to this notion of standing with our partners and not bailing on them when it gets hard.
Yeah, yeah. I think one of the very moving things about what's happening now is citizens stepping in where our governments failed us. And I'm also sort of intrigued by the background of all three of you. Green Berets, CIA, people who improvise, step into the shadows or into the gap and work things out. And I'm struck that your book, you know, nobody's coming to save you. And a phrase that Shannon has used, we are the plan.
Yeah, I took that from Scott.
Right, so And so what is it about Green Berets and CIA that perhaps make you particularly sort of fitted to carry on this, this mission, which I guess started with 9/11 and is continuing now?
Well, I would say both Green Berets and CIA officers are sort of, maybe even before being trained, we are sort of have that innate thing about getting to know people, liking people, and wanting to know their stories and wanting to understand them. And that's something that helps us so much. It's just a natural human trait, obviously, but when you do that with people, especially people who are from a distant country and a culture that's very different with different religion and everything, that's a great achievement when you're able to do those kind of things. So for us, that's something that's not only something we're trained to do, but it's something I think we bring to the table beforehand. And so that never stops, right? That just doesn't stop after you're done training or after you go on deployment. That's something you do from the heart. So that's something that I think is so great about what we're doing. And I just want to add, there are happy moments in all this stuff, especially now after all this time. We get to see the children of the widows and the families of those who had fallen, the Afghans who fell, in combat. We get to see some of their families thriving here in the United States. Young kids learning English, of course, extremely quickly in grade school, coming home with A's on their report cards, and their parents sending us texts and showing us pictures and stuff. And we had a family in Boise, Idaho. We have a large contingent of our people in Boise, Idaho, of all places. Sent us a text with a video of them dancing, traditional dance, in the mountains outside of Boise. And we said, oh, what kind of occasion is that? And they said, oh, we're just celebrating our freedom in America, these young people. Again, these people understand fully where they are and where they came from. That's what usually, for most of us, we can't even conceive of what Afghanistan was and is, especially now. Under Taliban rule, the oppression, we think we got problems. We don't, obviously. And these men back here, that are here today are examples of that. And they, they can't really talk about it with us because it's so foreign to us, right? What their experiences are and the depth of oppression, the depth of evil that they see and experience. It's hard for us as Americans to understand that. Some of us do. We talked about who these people are and why is it good to have them here? Well, they understand that. They can convey that. They can convey what we have. They can see what we have. They can see what they came from. And hopefully they can teach us about that. So we understand what we have. So we can protect it, nurture it, and make it real and make it last.
I think two things come to my mind. I'll try to make this quick in answer to your question, but one is, I think we do come with a mindset, like Scott wrote about. If you haven't read his book, Nobody's Coming to Save You, I recommend it, because that's kind of how we come to this problem. Like Green Berets, CIA officers, these esteemed gentlemen in the back, that's the ethos you come to the problem with. Nobody else is going to fix it. In fact, sometimes people talk about Mike's application to CIA had a sentence in it when he was applying to become a case officer. Somebody's got to do the things nobody else wants to do. So that's kind of the energy that we come to this problem. But another thing that you said in your book that I really enjoyed, and that is demonstrated by Badger 6, is connect like your life depends on it. So when these Afghan partners are reaching out to us, when our government is abandoning them, we start looking around like, okay, who can I connect to? I'm not going to wait for somebody else to solve this problem. I'm going to start reaching out to all of my my network. And that's something that every single person in this room has. You all have a network of people through your family and your careers and your lives and your neighborhoods that when faced with a problem, you can look around your own situation and say, who in my life can I connect with to solve this problem? And then quickly, the second thing that comes to mind is cultivating curiosity. So we are living in a culture right now of certainty. I'm certain you're not on my side and you are on my side, and there are sides and my side's right and your side's wrong. We have a lot of certainty about a lot of things. But all of you have demonstrated the quality of curiosity. You come out on a Tuesday night, spend your real dollars to come and see who these people are and what their story is. I think cultivating that skill of being curious that David mentioned, being curious about other cultures, being curious about potential solutions to problems, being curious about who in your life can bring those solutions and how you might be able to participate in it. That is an art that we're losing alongside these things that Scott has mentioned, and it's really, I think, the way that we need to get back to being more curious.
Yeah, just nobody's coming to save you. I actually would always hear that from these Green Beret team sergeants would say it to me when I was a young captain, like, sir, nobody's coming. Nobody's coming, it's just us. But they would always say it upbeat and optimistic, you know, because it was good news, like it was what you needed, because all you needed were your relationships. And a lot of people don't know this, but the CIA and Special Forces actually were born from the same outfit. It was called the Office of Strategic Services during World War II. And there was like little groups of 3 Jetbird teams that dropped into Nazi-occupied Europe, mostly teachers and lawyers that dropped in and stayed there the whole war. And they built relationships with partisans and people that were resisting. And that continued and it's continued for decades. The agency and Special Forces have built everything they do on relationships, on what's called social capital. And I've seen it over and over again. It's just the most amazing thing. In Panama, Just Cause, when Noriega was ousted and you had all of these Panamanian fighters out in the hinterland, a lot of people don't know this, but they had this campaign called the Ma Bell campaign. And a bunch of Green Berets that were stationed down in Panama flew into the local areas, because there was no internet then, and they had pockets full of quarters and dimes. And they went to the payphones and they called all of their contacts in the Panamanian Defense Forces and spoke to them in Spanish and talked them out. It was the largest mass surrender in modern war history. And it was all done by pre-existing relationships. But to me, that's not unique to Green Berets or CIA. That's something that we all have as Americans, is this innate ability to connect. And like Shannon said, I think this idea of just really pure discovery and taking delight in curiosity and seeing, you know, both sides of the coin is sorely needed today. So, I mean, when I talk about nobody's coming to save you, I think it's the best news out there, right? I mean, did anybody wake up this morning and just go, whoa, thank God for DC? I doubt it. I mean, because like that's just not how we live our lives. But those local connections and the ways that we build social capital, like that's everything. And we're losing that skill. That's, to me, the most important thing. It's the biggest threat we face, is that we're losing the skill for human connection, and more importantly, we're losing the value of it. And I think we've got to reclaim that.
Thank you. Well, we'll open it up to questions now from the audience. Some have been written down and handed to me on pieces of paper. First one, what is the situation of the Northern Alliance? We don't hear from them, we don't hear about them. My son is a veteran from the 82nd Airborne and had one tour in Afghanistan, and we are originally Iranians. And so what's happening in Afghanistan now? Scott's already alluded to this, it's not the end of the story.
Well, I think the better engagement for that would be our friends in the back and Nizam after we're done, probably talking to them, because they've got, not only do they have insights on what they now call the National Resistance Front, but there's also the other resistance movements that are out there, some of them that these guys are working actively, and they can speak to it much more intelligently than I do. I will say this, I did meet with Ahmed Massoud last summer Sean Ryan and I went over to Vienna, and I met with him and his team. And, you know, they are still engaged, they are still resisting. There's a lot of resistance going on in Afghanistan right now. But, you know, one of the things about a resistance that I do know is that a resistance just on its own is almost impossible. A resistance that only has the members in the country that are occupied resisting is not long of this earth. A resistance has to be tied to some type of external support. And what really concerns me about Afghanistan is that we spent 20 years building an unmatched intelligence and special operations capability so that another 9/11 would never happen, and we kicked it over like an anthill. And we left all of those individuals, minus the ones we got out, which was a handful. Most of them are fending for themselves right now with zero support. And that makes no sense to me. But Masood and what used to be the Northern Alliance are resisting along with others, and these guys in the back. I would encourage you to talk to them afterwards tonight. They have a lot of insights on it, and you should hear what they have to say.
Yeah, thank you. And this is maybe a good question for David. What motivated Afghans to help the US forces originally? And maybe something you have to be a little bit circumspect about. Have any Afghans expressed an interest in staying in Afghanistan as American assets? Can your organization fund them?
Yeah, that's a good question. The second part, we'll start with the first part. As I mentioned, 98% of Afghanistan was controlled by Taliban and Al-Qaeda forces in 2001. We have I don't want to say a similar situation now, but the country is controlled by Al-Qaeda and the Taliban today, at least Taliban, right? So 20 years on, there are things that are similar in terms of what's going on. As Scott mentioned, there's a resistance. There was a resistance in the 1990s, and we started to help them very modestly in the 1990s when I first went into Afghanistan in the late 1990s. That's not being done today. But these men that helped us in 2001, their motivations were simple. They hated the Taliban and Al-Qaeda. Sure, they were Muslims. All that stuff about Islam, we have to be very, very careful about some of that stuff. They hated what these men brought to Afghanistan. They brought oppression. They brought the suppression of all females, right? No women were allowed to do anything. So these men were motivated by the things that motivate us, freedom. They wanted freedom. And they knew that we represented that chance, and that's why they flocked to us. Initially in very small numbers, but they were ready to risk everything. They had already been risking everything. They had nothing to lose, except their lives, which they did lose in the course of their support of us. So in that regard, I think it was fairly simple. Their motivations were simple. They saw us as the only chance. And of course, we brought with us a great amount of power, military power and so forth. And so for them, it was a winning proposition. But at the beginning, there was no, they had no idea. And as I said, when we showed up, 8 guys, they were extremely, they were less than happy about that. But we quickly, with their support, moved forward. The second part, I think, we talk about our Afghan allies are still there. They may be in hiding now. Many are here. Many are in other countries. So the idea of collecting intelligence in Afghanistan, that will take care of itself if we decide as a country to focus on Afghanistan again. We have many friends that we can use. Some of them in this room, and people like them. I foresee a time when we call upon these guys again to help us again. They helped us in 2001, and the new generation is here. They're hankering to go back and fix things up, and maybe those days will come.
And maybe this is a good question for each one of you to wrap everything up. What is the legacy of America's 20 years in Afghanistan? What did we achieve, and was it worth it? Shannon.
I mean, it's easy to lose sight of the things that were gained during the 20 years we were partnered with Afghanistan because the end was so terrible. But it is important to me, some of our friends that David mentioned earlier, we have been able to bring a number of the widows of the commanders to the US. And one particular widow was very important to me because her husband was killed a few meters from mine in the same battle. And her 2 children were the same ages as our 2 oldest at that time. So I could, I felt the parallels of our life. And now, through the work in Badger 6, we were able to bring them to the United States. They live in New Jersey. But the oldest daughter, she was 8 at the time in 2001. And she grew up in a relative period of normal life for an Afghan woman. She became a doctor. She didn't know what was happening to her life when the Taliban were coming back. This was not the life that she had lived during those 20 years that she was able to grow up in a relatively free Afghanistan. And there are hundreds and thousands of those stories. So it's particularly important to me to remember the lives of the Afghan women that did get to prosper during those 20 years.
David?
Yeah, I would just echo that. We helped them create a place, a country that was starting to prosper, that was prospering. And we did it together. Obviously, it didn't last, but it's a great example of what we could do. We went in there with, just a few hundred men in 2001, and within weeks, the country had been transformed. The Taliban and Al-Qaeda were gone from the government power structures, and a new age, started. That can happen again. I think it's a great example of success. There were many, many problems, obviously, but the success was there. It's an example, and those people that thrived in that 20-year period are obviously still with us, and what they gained and what they learned, I think they're going to put it to good use, and we'll see something happen. Because, this kind of thing, this oppression and this destruction of, 50% of the population has no value, right? The women of Afghanistan have absolutely no value except providing children to these, to the Taliban. So there's really no future in Afghanistan the way it is. Obviously, this can go on for a while, but things will change. Whether we're, a catalyst for it, the United States government, or not, things will change.
And Scott, finally, what are your thoughts on the legacy and whether it was worth it?
Yeah, when I was a young captain in Colombia in the 90s, when you went to a remote outpost working with the Colombian forces, you couldn't even leave the base. It was impossible. The FARC, the guerrillas in Colombia, had a demilitarized zone known as the Despeje that was the size of Switzerland. Today, if you conduct missions, our special forces with Colombians, they're as good as anything on the planet, conducting night operations, surgical strike, completely unilaterally. It took decades to build that capacity. When 9/11 happened, one of the biggest findings from 9/11 was that we had no on-the-ground intelligence capacity like we needed to have, and we had no partner force. And the one that we did have, the Northern Alliance, we weren't really working with to the degree that we wanted to be. And these guys rectified that, right? But they had to do it on the right side of an explosion, a terrible day called 9/11. But we spent 20 years building an intelligence and partner force that was capable of doing most of the fighting by itself. And then we walked away from it. And what I would simply say is, unlike Vietnam and Korea and other wars that did not end well, at least they did not follow us home. This one will follow us home. Mark my words. There will be another strike on the homeland, in my assessment. And it will emanate largely from the very place we walked away from. And I think we will find ourselves loading back onto military transports and going into Afghanistan under duress. And I think we're going to largely rely on many of the men and women that we helped get out to help get back in and set things right. But I think the circumstances under which it happens, we have a choice, right? It doesn't have to be another 9/11, but I'm afraid on the current trajectory, if we don't wake up, it's going to be. So at least this time, there is a capacity that has been built, a very strong capacity, some of it which is here, some of it which is over there. The question remains, what is the willingness of those individuals to step up and respond to something like that after the way that we bailed on them? I don't know. Time will tell.
That was excellent, and just maybe before we conclude, I suppose I would maybe add, as a country, one of our greatest benefits is we're incredibly optimistic and forward-thinking, but sometimes too forward-thinking, we forget about the near past. The 1980s CIA had arguably its most successful covert operation in its entire history, with the Mujahideen defeating the Soviets. But as a country, largely, once we got what we wanted out of the relationship, we turned our back. I'm not saying it's all our fault, but it was not that much longer for Al-Qaeda became a global threat, and obviously 9/11 happens. I would say even honor and things like honoring commitments to politicians may not mean as much, just a pure realpolitik or geopolitics. The United States has had tens of thousands of troops in Western Europe for over 80 years. Similar numbers, or large numbers in Japan. We rebuilt both of those countries. We stood by them. We knew it wasn't going to be short or be easy. South Korea, 30,000 plus troops for over 70 years. The first 30 years, it was a dictatorship. The first few years, a brutal dictatorship. And I think as a country, if we turn our back on our allies, your word means something. And you may not think it's important for a country like Afghanistan, but for a major world power, if they think you're not reliable and not dependable, that's obviously very detrimental. In relation to that, I suppose kind of an odd way to put it, please join us in some of our upcoming events. As a council, we will